Obrigada. I want to start today by making sure my clicker is working, actually. It's the first thing I want to do. Give me just a moment. Okay, I think we're connected. Wonderful. So I want to start today by sharing with you a statistic from my research, a statistic that genuinely stunned me when I first calculated it. Since the start of the year 2020, there have been more than 2.5 million headlines and news stories with the word unimaginable in them. There were over 3 million news stories with the word unthinkable. And we've all lived through these unimaginable and unthinkable events together, from the pandemic to extreme weather and climate change, unprecedented protests and new social movements, shocking political events, and most recently, a new war. The fact that these two words show up so often in our stories tells us something important about our global condition. We're in a state of collective shock. We feel blindsided by reality. And it's not just that we didn't see this coming, there's also grief and anger baked into these words. We say unimaginable to mean heartbreaking. We use the word unthinkable to mean unacceptable, unjust, or unforgivable. These words speak not just to collective shock, but to collective trauma. So, how can we feel more ready and secure, more excited about the future, more capable of creating positive change if we're just constantly bracing ourselves for the next unimaginable event or unthinkable change? Do we really have to learn to live in a perpetual state of uncertainty and shock about what's next? I don't think so. At the Institute for the Future in Palo Alto, I conduct studies about what exactly happens in our brains and our bodies when we try to imagine the future. And I create games and simulations that help us predict hard to imagine futures. For example, back in the year 2010, I created a simulation for the World Bank set 10 years in the future, in the year 2020. And more than 20,000 participants spent 10 weeks imagining how they would adapt and try to help others if the world were facing a series of hypothetical cascading crises. Now, this game, it started with a respiratory pandemic caused by a novel virus, first identified in China. And it was complicated by supply chain breakdowns and by historic wildfires and extreme heat waves and by misinformation and conspiracy theories spreading about the pandemic on social media. This is what we were imagining the year 2020 might be like back in the year 2010. You can see images from that simulation here, images that we made to help participants ready themselves for risks we might face 10 years in the future. And so, yes, in 2010, 20,000 gamers were collaborating and strategizing and telling stories about how they personally would adapt and try to help others during the exact same combination of super threats that we actually faced in the real year 2020. And I share this story simply to demonstrate that all of these events we've just lived through were indeed vividly imaginable and thinkable long before they happened. We do have ample time to prepare for the challenges of the future or even to prevent if we're willing to pay serious attention and pay serious imagination to growing risks and threats on the horizon. We can move out of this state of shock and anxiety about what's next into something better, into a mindset that at the Institute for the Future we call urgent optimism. Now, urgent optimism is a highly resilient mindset, and it's made up of three key psychological strengths, which we can measure and we can improve. And these three strengths are mental flexibility, realistic hope, and future power. Mental flexibility is the opposite of being stuck mentally. It's the ability to recognize that anything can become different in the future, even things that seem impossible to change today. Realistic hope means actively balancing our positive and shadow imagination. It's being alert to new risks and growing threats that it makes sense to worry about, but it's also being alert to new solutions, technologies, ideas, and positive actions it makes sense to be excited and optimistic about. And future power is a feeling of control and real agency to directly impact how the future turns out by taking intentional action today with an eye toward longer term impacts. So it means developing the patience for taking action at 10-year timescales and beyond. Now, you can all get a sense of your own urgent optimism right now by answering 3 quick questions, and I'd like to try it together. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, when you think about the next 10 years of post pandemic society, do you think things will mostly stay the same and go on as normal? Or do you expect that most of us will dramatically rethink and reinvent how we do things? 1 is almost everything stays the same. 10 is almost everything will be dramatically different. So you can think of your number. Personally, I'm a 9 on this one. On a scale of 1 to 10, when you think about how post-pandemic society will change over the next 10 years, are you mostly worried or mostly optimistic? This measures our realistic hope. 1 is extremely worried, 10 is extremely optimistic. You can think of your number. I'm a 7 on this one myself. Finally, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much control or influence do you feel that you personally have to help determine how post-pandemic society changes over the next 10 years? So 1 is almost no control or influence, 10 is almost complete control or influence. And here I'm a 6, I would say. So if you like, you can add up your 3 numbers, and that's your overall urgent optimism score, something between 3 and 30. Now, this is not a diagnostic tool. There are no good scores or bad scores. It's a conversation starter. So we might say to one another, "Oh, you said 8 on change. Why is that?" "Well, I said 4, and here's why." And it's a tool for personal exploration. Our scores can help us think about if and where our mindset might be stuck. Our scores can help us acknowledge and reflect on our own truths about what we're most worried about, what we're most hopeful for. And I want to encourage you to revisit these 3 questions, to take them to a team meeting or a community gathering or a strategy session and ask them of each other. And take some time to talk through your answers. What I hear from organizations and community groups that I work with is that these 3 questions are incredibly powerful ways to spark important and transformative internal conversations. Now, here's the most important thing to know about urgent optimism. It's not a fixed personality trait. It changes often throughout our lives, and it changes from topic to topic. So if we were to ask each other these same 3 questions right now about different topics, the future of food, the future of the climate, the future of democracy, the future of learning, the future of religion, we would all have a whole bunch of diverse and varied urgent optimism scores, because really there's not just one singular future. We're trying to shape not just one future, but many different futures that all intersect and influence each other. And we do have very different levels of urgent optimism for different futures. So urgent optimism, it changes throughout our lives. It changes from topic to topic. And crucially, it's changeable, which is what I really want to talk to you about today. We can purposefully build more urgent optimism when we need it most to face the future with more readiness, more creativity, and more authentic hope. And the way that we build urgent optimism is with future imagination training and something we call mental time travel. So let's try a quick imagination training experiment together. It's a thought experiment or an imagination experiment. And feel free to close your eyes if it helps you focus. So for the next 30 seconds, I want you to imagine yourself waking up tomorrow morning and try to picture it in your mind or describe it to yourself as clearly as possible. What room or space are you waking up in? What wakes you up? Is it an alarm? Is it the sunlight? Is it someone nudging you or calling you? Is it light out or still dark when you wake up? Is anyone with you? It might be a person or a pet. Can you picture which side of the bed you're on, if you're in a bed, or maybe you're waking up somewhere else? What are you wearing? What kind of mood are you in when you wake up? And what's the very first thing you plan to do now that you're awake? Keep imagining it until you have a really realistic scene playing out in your mind. Okay, this wasn't so hard, right? This quick mental time trip that you just took is an example of a highly imaginable future. It was likely quite easy for you to envision with plenty of vivid details. And what makes it so imaginable is that there's not too much room for uncertainty between now and tomorrow morning. It doesn't mean you could predict it with 100% certainty, but you do have all the information you need to simulate in your mind clearly at least one likely possibility. Now we're going to try something a little more challenging. This time, I want you to imagine yourself waking up 10 years from today. Try to come up with just as vivid and plausible an image, as detailed as you can. 10 years from today, are you waking up somewhere different than you expect to wake up tomorrow? Is someone different with you, a different person, a different pet? Are you physically changed in some way? Do you have a different morning habit a decade from now? Something you do as soon as you wake up that you don't do today? What might that new habit be? Would you like to imagine waking up in a completely different mood than you expect to wake up in tomorrow? What might put you in this new mood? What might you have planned for the day? And how do you feel about it? Now, try not to make this future a total fantasy. Stay grounded in what you feel is realistic and possible for you. And I want you to keep imagining this moment 10 years from now until you've filled in as many specific details as possible. So I'll pause here for a moment to let you try to bring this scene to life. Okay, so did you feel a difference in your brain and your body as you stretched your imagination 10 years into the future? For most people, the sensation of this activity is like reaching for something that isn't quite there. Some people feel it mentally, some physically, and others both. You may have noticed that your eyes started moving around almost involuntarily, as if you were looking for clues. This is quite common when we try to imagine the future. It helps us to see what isn't there yet. Or perhaps you noticed that your fingers were kind of rubbing together, your hands were moving around, maybe touching things unconsciously, as if feeling for information. Touch is the first way we learn about the world when we're born, when we're babies, and in times of uncertainty, we often revert to literally feeling our way. And even if you didn't have any physical reaction, you probably did feel the mental effort. Your brain works so much harder the further you stretch your imagination into the future. Why? Well, there's so much opportunity for things to change in 10 years. Your circumstances, your relationships, your environment, your brain intuitively grasps this uncertainty, this unknowability. It does not have the necessary data to simulate perfectly what might happen. So instead of projecting confidently one possibility into the future, your brain opens up a blank space for you to consider multiple possibilities. And at this point, you have to start making intentional choices about what you want to imagine in your future. You have to fill in the blanks. And filling in the blanks takes considerable mental and emotional effort. But it's precisely because of that stretch, that strain, that this kind of imagination is so powerful. Instead of simply remembering what it already knows, your brain has to invent a new possibility. And you may have actually felt this mental stretching, this act of creation happening while you tried to imagine waking up 10 years from today. You could have felt your brain forging these new neurological pathways, making a brand new memory of something you haven't even lived through yet. And after you've made this future memory, something amazing happens. What was previously unimaginable to your brain is now quite literally imaginable. The next time you try to think about this possible future, a vivid mental image or a detailed description will spring immediately to mind, and you can use this new memory of the future to plan and prepare for the future much more effectively. You can revisit this memory whenever you want and examine how it makes you feel. Does it spark positive or negative emotions? These pre-feelings can help you figure out, should I change what I'm doing today to make this possible future more or less likely? Now, scientists call this form of imagination mental time travel. It's the mental ability to transport ourselves forward in time and pre experience a future event. It is more than just thinking about the future, it's actively simulating the future in our minds. It's the difference between knowing that it's probably going to rain tomorrow, a kind of fact or abstract thought about the future, and vividly imagining ourselves in the rain, trying to pre-feel the rain on our skin and using everything we know about what tomorrow might be like to make the scenario more detailed and more realistic. So mental time travel might entail picturing where exactly you'll be when it starts to rain, what you're wearing. Did you remember your umbrella? Who's with you? Are you annoyed by the rain or are you delighted by it? Do you rush to get somewhere dry or stroll leisurely through it? And so on. Mental time travel, it's not a daydream in which you fantasize about living a completely different life or waking up in a world where all our problems are magically solved. It should be plausible, grounded in reality, inspired by real signals of change that are happening today, and informed by real drivers of change that are likely to influence how our future turns out. The future might very well be better than today, but it will also undoubtedly come with challenges. So, mental time travel isn't an escape from reality, it's a way of playing with reality to discover risks and opportunities we might not previously have considered. Now, here's a fun fact about mental time travel. In the past 20 years, there have been over 5,000 peer reviewed scientific studies published on the topic of mental time travel, particularly in the field of neuroscience. Now, why do so many scientists study it? There are three reasons mainly. So, first, mental time travel is strongly linked with psychological well being. People who have a regular habit of mental time travel are more likely to feel optimistic, motivated, and in control of their future. They are less likely to feel anxious or depressed. Researchers believe that this is because when we practice mental time travel, we learn to control our imagination. So consider depression. Scientists have found that people who suffer from depression tend to imagine their future with only the vaguest details. For them, a positive future is hard to imagine because their brain leaves too many of the mental blanks unfilled. And for this reason, they can't vividly anticipate pleasure. They don't feel motivated by possible positive events, and they can't convincingly envision their future as being different from today because it's just a blank slate. Their imagination gets stuck and leaves them almost literally with nothing to look forward to. Now, individuals with anxiety tend to have the opposite problem. Their brain gets stuck thinking about possible negative future events in extremely vivid detail. They simulate mentally in highly convincing ways all the futures that scare them. No blank gets left unfilled. But they skip the step in mental time travel where their brain chooses what to imagine, chooses to focus on futures that speak to their deepest values, their positive motivations. And mental time travel can give both groups more control over what they see in their mind's eye. In fact, studies show that people with depression and anxiety who learn to do mental time travel, they do train their imagination to construct highly detailed scenes that are vivid instead of vague, and they can choose to fill them with positive possibilities that feel realistic. And this activity significantly reduces symptoms of depression and anxiety. Now, a second reason many researchers are interested in mental time travel is that it seems to be a highly effective tool for behavior change. So, research shows that people who learn how to more vividly and plausibly imagine their own personal futures are more likely to make healthy eating choices, keep up new exercise or meditation habits, save more money for long term goals, complete their education, vote in elections, buy more sustainable and environmentally friendly products, even break the cycle of addiction, and stick with any kind of long term resolution to change. What all these behaviors have in common is that they require us to make an effort or a difficult choice today that will have a delayed benefit for our future selves. So we have to be able to envision vividly a long term payoff, even if it's far in the future. And that's where mental time travel comes in. If we spend more time mentally visiting our future, it gets easier to make this kind of long term investment. We feel more connected to our future selves. And finally, the third reason we know so much about what happens in the brain during mental time travel is that it's linked with creativity, something many people want to get better at. And in studies, when individuals complete imagination challenges like you just did, challenges like imagine yourself meeting a friend for breakfast 1 year from today, or imagine yourself taking a walk on the beach 10 years from today, they subsequently perform significantly better on different tests of creativity. And the further out the future imagined, the stronger the effect. So, in studies, thinking about 1 year from today increased creative performance more than thinking about tomorrow. But imagining 10 years out increased it even more. So there are all of these important benefits to mental time travel. It can make us feel better, it can change our behavior, but it can help us do more than just change ourselves. It can help us change our communities, our industries, our society. And this is especially true when we go on mental time trips together to visit worlds that others might describe as unthinkable or unimaginable today. And the way we time travel together is by picking one destination for all of us to visit in our imagination. And this is a destination that professional futurists call a future scenario. A future scenario is a detailed description of a particular future we might wake up in, a world in which at least one thing is dramatically different from today. And when we first encounter a future scenario, we get to find out what exactly has changed, how do things work now, what's the new normal. And a scenario, it brings us together so that instead of each of us separately imagining our own individual futures, we're all taking mental time trips to the same future so we can get collective intelligence, collective imagination. And here are some future scenarios that we're playing with right now at the Institute for the Future, looking ahead to the year 2035. We're imagining a world in which extreme heat is leading to new seasonal migration patterns as some parts of the world become incompatible with human life for several months each year. We're imagining a world in which central bank digital currencies completely replace cash, a world in which there is no minimum voting age in most democracies, meaning kids can vote in official elections, a world in which geoengineering efforts are underway and we must manage their unintended consequences and unequal impacts. For example, solar radiation management, in which sulfate particles are injected into the atmosphere to deflect some of the sun's rays, which could help lower global temperatures and help us heal from extreme heat, but which could also increase flooding in some regions, malaria spread in others. So how do we pursue such interventions ethically and equitably? We're imagining a world in which immigration laws and border policies are dramatically loosened up to pre-World War I levels in order to help solve the problem of aging populations in wealthy countries, to acknowledge and promote freedom of movement as a fundamental human right, and to support a safe and equitable mass climate migration if necessary, if we see up to 1 billion people relocating within and across borders in the next 30 years. And finally, we are imagining a world with a new tick-borne pandemic, a world in which as many as 1/3 of people on the planet develop severe allergies to meat and other animal products, requiring a radical rethink of how we feed ourselves, how we interact with nature and with the outdoors, and how we scale up healthcare infrastructures worldwide. Now, some of these worlds might be outside your current imagination comfort zone. They might sound impossible or unthinkable or ridiculous to you. But we actually have a saying at the Institute for the Future. Any useful statement about the future should at first seem ridiculous. This is so important to us. We actually have it painted on our front window at the Institute. And why do we say this? Well, the most useful future ideas, the most useful worlds to imagine are the ones that challenge our assumptions about what can and cannot change. They're the ones that require us to consider transformative possibilities. The most useful statements about the future help us prepare for futures that other people would dismiss, that they would say, that could never happen, or I just can't imagine that. Those are the futures that are the most disruptive, the most difficult to adapt to if they actually happen. Now, because mental time travel allows us to pre-feel different, ridiculous at first futures, it becomes a powerful decision-making, planning, and motivational tool. It helps us decide, is this a world I want to wake up in? What do I need to do to be ready for it? How could I help others in this future? Should I try to change what I'm doing today to make this future more or less likely? And what I want you to leave knowing today is that asking these 4 questions about possible future scenarios, worlds that we visit in our mind, this is what measurably increases urgent optimism. This kind of mental time travel, it stretches our mental flexibility, it increases our realistic hope, and it helps us grow confidence in our future power. So we can feel ready for anything, and so we can develop the patience to take actions with long-term benefits at the timescale of 10 years and beyond. So this is the antidote to future shock, playing with these scenarios. We all can do it. We can do it together. How do we get more people in our organizations, in our communities, playing with these otherwise unimaginable futures? At the Institute for the Future, we actually have a scenario club called Urgent Optimists. It's open to the public It's like a book club, except instead of reading books, we read future scenarios, and then we meet live to discuss them. And this is my advice to you and to your teams and your communities. Create your own scenario clubs and practice mental time travel together. And of course, you're welcome to join us at Urgent Optimist to time travel with us and to build your simulation skills and to learn how to run these scenarios for others. We've had a very, very short time today for you to get a taste of this kind of imagination work. But if it piques your interest, please follow up with me, follow up with the Institute for the Future. And I want to thank you for being willing to consider ridiculous at first ideas. Looking around the world right now, it's clear that the words unthinkable and unimaginable no longer apply. We can't say for sure what the future will be, except for one thing: it will be different, and we need to be ready. Thank you. Obrigada.